Assalamu alaikum. Today we will be presenting on prohibitions of Gharar in modern exchange. So a little introduction into the topic. So Islam has always taught believers to be just, fair and ethical in all aspects of life. So now the Muslims are now guided by the Islamic law known as Sharia, which is based on the commandment of Allah in the Quran and the commandment of the Prophet ﷺ in the Hadith. And now every Muslim must know that their goal is to seek pleasure of Allah SWT and must avoid getting benefits from unlawful sources when doing business transactions. And Gharar is one of the main prohibitions in Islam. Thus, Gharar is unlawful in Islam. This presentation will give you a clear explanation of Gharar's involvement in the modern exchange and can help economists, entrepreneurs, and all related parties to understand Gharar and to help them avoid engaging in prohibited businesses, especially those involving Gharar. There are different types of uncertainty in the contemporary aspect. So, firstly, Gharar in the Arabic word means fraud, uncertainty, risk, or hazard that can cause destruction or loss to a person.
Sustainable Development Goal 8, Decent Work and Economic Growth, which called SDG 8. So what is SDG 8? According to the United Nations website, the 8th goal of SDG is economic growth and decent work. Essentially, the goal is to promote sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment and decent work for all. Furthermore, they also have their own target and want to achieve the goals under the 8th goal. By 2020, the target was substantially reduce the proportion of youth not in employment, education or training and development and operationalize a global strategy for youth employment and implement the global jobs pact of the International Labour Organization. The year 2020 was mainly on developing and taking care of the youth in the world. However, with all the restrictions due to COVID-19, the goal is not yet fulfilled. In 2030, they target to achieve full and productive employment and decent work for all women and men, including for young people and persons with disabilities. An equal pay for work of equal value, and on top of that, devise and implement policies to promote sustainable tourism that create jobs and promotes local culture and products. These goals imply that everyone should have the same opportunities regardless of our family background, disabilities and gender.
There are two types of Gharar, which are Gharar Yasir and Gharar Fahish. Gharar Yasir is a minor amount of uncertainty that exists in a contract that can be tolerated and will not invalidate contracts such as by Aslam and by Istisna. The second type of Gharar is Gharar Fahish, which cannot be tolerated and will invalidate the contract. The first example of Gharar Fahish is insurance. Insurance is the exchange of liability for premiums. One party pays the other party to bear the risk on his behalf. For example, if a certain property is damaged, the insurance company will lose because it is required to compensate the insured more than premium paid. The insured will lose the premium benefit if the insurable damage does not occur. Thus, both of the parties involved in the exchange of an uncertain outcome. The second type of contract that involves Gharars is the forward contract. In the forward contract, the seller and buyer agree to exchange goods at a set price and quantity at a later period. The commodity price can fluctuate. It can be difficult for a company to predict future prices and make long-term production decisions. Hence, it might cause the company to incur a loss. So, forward contracts allow the companies to fix the price or their raw materials in advance. Other than that, the companies also can use forward contract in the exchange of foreign currency. For example, in a currency forward contract, a seller agrees to sell $1 for 4 ringgit and 50 cents at a future date. If the exchange rate at the specific date goes up to 5 ringgit, the seller lost 50 cents per US dollar, and if the exchange rate at the specific date goes down to 4 ringgit, the seller gained 50 cents per US dollar. The variations in the exchange rate will benefit one party and at the same time hurt another party. Thirdly is an option contract that is mainly involved in the stock market trading and foreign exchange market. An option contract is an agreement between two parties to trade an asset at a certain price and date in the future with a premium fee. Purchasing an option gives buyers the right but not the obligation to buy or sell a stock. For example, company XYZ shares are trading at 100 ringgit and a seller trying to sell a cover call at 120 ringgit with a 1 month expiration. If the stock price remains below 120, the option expired worthlessly. And if the price rises above 120 ringgit, the buyer can call the shares and buy them for 120 ringgit. Option trading allows a company to bet based on a guess on the stock price movement, and the outcome of the transaction depends purely on the movement of the price and is not certain. Next is the involvement of Gharar in the sale of goods and services. Firstly, the absence of crucial information about the goods that seller sells. Secondly, selling things without indicating their pricing, correct description, label. Thirdly, not allowing the customer to fully inspect the item. Fourthly, selling some goods without revealing their negative effect. And lastly, when investors put their money into a firm without being informed of the contract's terms, such as the proportion of profit and loss sharing.
It is essential to distinguish between Gharar and risk in conducting businesses. Firstly, Gharar refers to a potentially deceptive and uncertain agreement. In contrast, risk is a type of uncertainty that is not designed to cheat and does not lead to disputes between parties. Other than that, Gharar is not anticipated by the party at whom it is intended, while risk is anticipated. Gharar is directed at another person, while risk is taken by a person himself. For example, in case of sale, the seller may leave some terms and conditions ambiguous in order to cheat the purchaser. However, in case of a risk, it is a seller himself who takes the risk of whether the goods would be sold or not. Lastly, Gharar raises when information is not disclosed. For instance, Gharar exists when the shareholders do not know where the money is invested. Risk, on the other hand, exists even when there is a full disclosure of information.
The consequences of Gharar involvement in modern exchange. So in Islam, when it comes to anything dealing with Gharar, we now know that having any potential uncontrollable risks are strictly forbidden. So therefore, it is not allowed in Islam. So when we deal with the context of modern exchange, we are dealing with currency, forex, stock market, etc. There are many different Islamic scholars' views on whether this is allowed in Islam or not. Frankly, if we follow the strict rules of Gharar, it automatically shuts down any view supporting it, because investing in the new stock market is a gamble which leads to unjust enrichment, which is very clear in the Quran where it says that gambling is haram. The purpose of prohibiting uncertainty is to avoid oppression towards unfortunate people and to ensure that society does not lose any property that can be a burden for them because of the debts they must bear. It is stated in the Quran, Allah desired that He should make light your burdens. A man is created weak. This is also an act of prevention rather than cure. So, in conclusion, Islam encourages Muslims to act wisely before making any decisions and think about all possible reasons in every prohibition. In the same way, uncertainty represents a tough challenge for business operators to ensure that their business arrangements are free from Gharar elements, which may lead to injustice, exploitation, or enmity among the involved parties.
In modern exchange, the development of some methods has been used in excluding the elements of riba, maisir and gharar. For example, al-Salam, istisna, contract, wa'ad and takaful are some of the ways to exclude gharar in modern exchange.
The implementation of al-Salam concept in modern exchange, especially in agriculture sector in some countries, can make some business transactions become permissible. Al-Salam can be defined as forward contract, sale and payment of future goods that are not available at the time of the contract that is required to be delivered later in the future at a fixed date. Al-Salam become permissible due to Prophet Mohamed SAW allowing this transaction in a previous situation where small farmers needed some money to grow their crops and for their families. In this modern exchange, al-Salam has been used for agriculture sector. For example, in Nigeria, which is primarily an agriculture society, they implement Islamic finance and banking by introducing al-Salam as an alternative as a solution to their financial problem and by investing their money in sustaining the agriculture sector. Therefore, this method can be used in some countries with financial problems in scouting solutions in forward contracts. By using this method, some modern exchange in businesses can exclude major gharar as it fully prohibited. Other than that, modern exchange can implement the concept of istisna contract that refers to a request from the buyer to manufacture something later according to specification agreed by both parties. In other words, istisna contract is a sale of specified goods that will be manufactured or constructed as a moral obligation towards the manufacturer to deliver them to their customer after manufacturing is completed. The implementation in both of these methods to modern exchange can help people avoid gharar as these contracts are considered very effective in minimizing many types of risks. As most of modern exchange involve gharar, instead we can minimize it slowly by this implementation in certain businesses. However, the permissibility of these both contracts must be viewed in Islamic viewpoint according to Sharia, in relation to its transactions and validity of the contract. The application of the wa'ad promise principle to Islamic forward foreign currency contracts is one of the approach for Islamic banks to develop Islamic contemporary products to remain competitive. The concept of wa'ad is allowed in Islam since it is aligned with the attainment of the maqasid al-Sharia. Wa'ad is a promise that shows a person's willingness to collaborate on a certain project with another group of individuals. It is a promise made by one person to another to perform a certain activity that benefits the other party. In a business transaction, a promise has two meanings: an offer from the offered and acceptance from the offered. As a consequence, the promise made is binding on the offer themselves, and it will become enforceable once the offer is presented and fits the requirements, also standard established for acceptance. According to Islamic principles, takaful has been created as the Islamic version of insurance that was developed as an alternative to the conventional insurance, but it has violated the Islamic prohibitions on riba, maisir and gharar. Takaful emphasizes the concept of ta'awun or mutual cooperation among the takaful participants. Hence, takaful may be defined as a sort of mutual assistance in advancing wealth through assisting those who are in need or experiencing suffering.
Other than that, takaful is free from gharar as no commercial contract relating to the buying and selling protection of the ambiguous event is involved as practiced by the conventional insurance, but rather the underlying contract is based on the tabarruk and ta'awun agreement.
So in Islam, why is gharar haram? So let's just take a look or let's just take a recap on what gharar is and the definition of gharar. So gharar means uncertainty in terms of delivery the rights of both parties in a contract. Thus the uncertainty can lead to injustice towards one party. So there is one legal maxim related to Islam jurisprudence where the fundamental of every contract is justice. So to simplify, based on this maxim, any contract, regardless related to marital affairs, muamalat, criminal, must promote the element of justice. It is impermissible if the contract gives injustice to either one party or both parties. So in Islam, we do not tolerate with injustice. That's why it's haram in Islam, because it oppresses one party in the business transaction. And it is clear that Gharar can lead to injustice. Just imagine if Gharar is permissible to be practiced, for instance, to gain higher profit. So let's say a seller of used car hides a defect of the car that he's selling. For sure, it will lead to the loss of the buyers. The buyers would then have to pay for the cost of the repairs and unknowing the defect of the car, not because of their hands. Also, the application of mystery box in the internet, for example, the buyer will pay the seller without knowing the content of the box. The injustice is so clear there. There is no issue if the buyer got the item that he wants. For sure, it will lead to a dispute between the buyer and the seller. If such practice is permissible, then the rich, which are normally the seller, will be richer but mingling with the element of uncertainty and oppression towards the buyer, which most of the time is the poorer people. In Islam, it is prohibited that only one party gains the benefit through exploitative gains, because it indirectly makes only one party wins in a particular contract while one party will suffer losses, which then leads to a bigger gap between the rich and the oppressed people or the poor people. Then there's the injustice basically. Islam always teaches us to be just, to be fair and ethical in every aspect of life. Muslims are guided by the Islamic law and Sharia, which is based on the commandment of Allah in the Quran and the commandment of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in the Hadith. Every Muslim must know their goal is to seek the pleasure of Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala and must avoid getting benefits from the unlawful sources, especially when doing business transactions, because in the Akhirah Allah will ask us where our money goes to, like what do we do in our life. So if most of our money are going into haram places, or we get our money from haram sources, so we will get punishment in the hereafter or in Akhirah. In chapter 4, ayat 135, stand up firmly for justice as a witness to God, even as against yourself, your parents, your kin, and whether it against the rich or the poor. So Allah has told us in the Quran that we have to stand up to justice against everyone. The purpose of prohibiting uncertainty is to avoid oppression towards the unfortunate people and to ensure that society does not lose any property that can be a burden for them because of the debts they must bear or that they must bear. It is stated in the Quran, chapter 4, again, ayat 28, Allah desired that He should make light your burdens and man is created weak. So Allah has already told us that we have to make other people's problem lighter, not bigger. Because Allah has created us weak and we have to stand up against injustice and we have to promote justice as we are Muslims.
As a Muslim, we must always be steadfast in everything we do in accordance with the Quran and Sunnah. The main goal will always to be seek to Allah's pleasure. Gharar, as we know, is very common thing in modern exchange. Thus, we have to be entrusted by our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to not be involved and to always find ways to avoid it, such as only participating in legal business transactions and staying away from gambling and anything that could go against the nature and principles of Islam. Over and above that, we as Muslims have moral values and spiritual belief in the afterlife.